this
Okay.
part.
Thank you.
And then I'll also assign you both co-host responsibilities because I didn't do that before and I apologize.
That's all right. All right, well, welcome everybody to the Career Insights Forum. We are going to be speaking with a number of speakers today that really represent a broad swath of careers possible in anthropology in Alaska specifically. And we are super appreciative of all of our panelists that have offered to speak with us today and possibly this afternoon. And we really want to emphasize that this is kind of a safe and candid space for students and pre-professionals to gain support and kind of some different perspectives regarding career exploration and, you know, furthering your understanding of careers that you might already be contemplating and considering. A couple of notes. Me, Maureen, and Sheena will be introducing each of the panelists, and we'll be starting with Erin Leggett. And we invite attendees to, as speakers are going through their presentation, to put their questions in the chat so we can kind of help summarize them at the end of their talks. And so you can get them down as, you know, as you're thinking of them and they're fresh in your mind. And for this presentation, we asked presenters to answer one or two of the following questions. What does a day in the life of an anthropologist, archaeologist, or cultural resources professional really look like? What are the day-to-day tasks and skills that are really important in this work and perhaps unexpectedly so? What do you wish you'd learned about your profession in school? What have you learned on the job? And what would you do differently if you could start over knowing what you know now? So without further ado, I'll change it over to Sheena to introduce Erin. Thank you.
Hi, good morning. I'm Sheena Duvall, and I'd like to introduce my friend and colleague, Erin Leggett. Erin was born in Anchorage of Dena'ina Athabascan heritage and currently serves as the president of the native village of Eklutna. He works as the senior curator of Alaska history and Indigenous cultures at the Anchorage Museum and was the Dena'ina cultural historian at the Alaska Native Heritage Center. He is a shareholder in CERI, the Alaska Native Regional Corporation for the Cook Inlet area. He also serves as an advisor to the Smithsonian's Arctic Studies Center and is a member of the board of directors of the Cook Inlet Historical Society and the Alaska Historical Society. In his career, Erin has played a vital role in preserving, perpetuating, and elevating the Dena'ina language and culture. He was instrumental in bringing the first exhibition of the Dena'ina Athabascan people, Dena'ina, who, you'll help me, Erin.
Kuchil-Yashi.
Thank you. The Dena'ina way of living to the Anchorage Museum in 2013. He was raised in Anchorage at a time when there was almost no recognition of the original inhabitants of Cook Inlet. Building on his knowledge obtained from his grandmother, and after earning his degree in anthropology from the University of Alaska at Anchorage, Leggett set out to change the historical narrative. He has authored numerous scholarly articles and co-authored publications about the Dena'ina language and people. Leggett was an influential voice in naming the Dena'ina Civic and Convention Center in Anchorage and helped select the art that is being displayed there. He's also been involved in putting up a series of interpretive signs around Anchorage that reflect Dena'ina culture. In 2014, Erin was recognized by CERI as its Shareholder of the Year and was also awarded the Culture Bearer of the Year by the Alaska Federation of Natives and by the state of Alaska for the Governor's Distinguished Service to the Humanities. Erin, thanks so much for being here with us today. And I'd love to start by just asking you, what does a day in your life look like as an anthropologist and cultural resource specialist?
A day in the life, every day is different, I suppose. I mean, every day starts off by checking my emails and seeing what's cropped up. It could be inquiries about my grandma had X, Y, lived in Alaska, had X, Y, and Z artifacts. Would the museum be interested in having them donated? It could be doing welcomes, could be doing talks, meeting with different individuals. research for exhibitions or questions that come again, through my desk, working on long-term exhibitions or exhibition plans for the museum. Could be pre-pandemic, traveling around the world, presenting at different conferences, trying to make connections across the circumpolar north, with different colleagues in places like Finland, Russia, Norway, Sweden, Canada. It could be being the executive producer on a Northern Indigenous hip hop film. So every day is a new surprise, I guess, for me. And it just depends on, what's going on and trying to make myself available. Also, with my role at the museum and being the president of the native village of Eklutna, working on things that crop up with the tribe, trying to wedge those in between everything else that I'm working on. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, I guess every day is varied. There is no set plan. And for me, I may have a set of goals that I'm trying to accomplish during the day, but those can get quickly thrown out the window and just have to go with the flow.
Erin, the second question I'll ask you is, in your work, it's so varied. You have so many different responsibilities, both at the museum and in your governmental roles. What have you had to learn on the job?
What have I had to learn on the job? Oh, that's a good question. I guess to be patient. Sometimes things, can take years. A good example of that is talking about the Dena'ina Convention Center. Initially in 2007, there was a plan to do an interpretive exhibit inside the convention center itself. For various reasons, that didn't happen. And then when the pandemic hit, and there was a push to kind of access some funds that were quickly available through the city, one of the things that was sort of proposed, and I got a lot of inquiries, were what kind of quote unquote shovel-ready projects were there. And I was able to dust off this interpretive exhibition plan that we had done in 2007 and say, this is what I think we could accomplish in a relatively short period of time. But because of, again, various political considerations and just the way working with different entities, and the pandemic, kind of rolling on longer than it took. Hopefully the exhibition will be installed this summer. And when we have hopefully AFN in October, people will be able to see the exhibit. But the point being that this essentially is 15 years in the making. So I guess what I'm trying to say is sometimes it's like a big Tetris game, trying to piece different ideas or projects or connections and try to leverage those into new opportunities. So.
Thank you. That's great. And on that question, since we have just about a minute left, I think about the things you learn when you're going to school for anthropology and you're getting a degree in anthropology versus, what we end up finding we're doing on the day to day. And so sometimes there's a contrast. Sometimes, your educational background really benefits you. And sometimes you find there were holes and you only find that when you're working. So,
well, I think the most important thing, just real quick to wrap it up, the most important thing that my degree taught me was, number one, how to think critically, and how to also research problems and connections and know where to look to try to find information. Sometimes I say, I don't know everything, but I do know probably how to find you the answers to your questions. So I think that to me is probably by far the most important thing, the critical thinking and the research skills of, leveraging connections or kind of filing away different people that I've met or specialties or areas of specialization.
Thank you, Erin. That's That's great. And we encourage people to post additional questions in the chat. If you can monitor the chat, Erin, and see if any questions come up for you, and then we'll have more time for discussion. I'd like to hand it over to Ruby to introduce Dr. Jennifer Shah.
Sure, it's my pleasure. Jen Shah is from Lawrence, Kansas, and has lived in Alaska since 2003. She is of Ashkenazi Jewish and French Canadian descent, and she received a BA from Mount Holyoke College in 1993 with a PhD in medical anthropology from Case Western Reserve University in 2013, with a dissertation on the role of subsistence culture in the well-being of Dena'ina Athabascan youth. Since 2010, she has worked as a health services researcher at Southcentral Foundation, a tribal health organization based in Anchorage, serving 65,000 Alaska Native and American Indian people in Anchorage, the Mat-Su Valley, and 55 rural villages. At SCF, Jennifer is a principal investigator on a diverse range of clinical research studies with a primary focus on suicide prevention, substance use treatment, and palliative care. When she's not working, Jennifer enjoys music, traveling, ocean fishing, and hiking with her husband, their dogs, Kismet and Karma. And as her Facebook friend, I can attest to a lot of amazing pictures coming from those adventures. So I will turn it over to Jen. Thanks.
Thanks, Ruby. I am definitely one of those dog moms that posts an obnoxious amount of pictures about my dogs, because I think the world deserves to enjoy them as much as I do. It's a pleasure to be with you all today. I really enjoyed listening to Erin's presentation, and thank you so much for going first, Erin. That was really helpful. And I am super excited to be able to share about the work that I do. It's egocentric, but I like to say that I have the best possible job a medical anthropologist could have, which is not fair because I know a lot of you have great jobs. But I feel very, very fortunate to be able to do the work I do. Like Erin, a day in my life as a medical anthropologist is very eclectic and diverse and unpredictable sometimes. And so I do clinical research. So I'm coordinating a lot with clinical staff in our tribal healthcare system. I'm coordinating with other researchers at universities who we partner with, like Ruby, and universities all over the country. I think we have research projects right now where we're partnering with people in New Mexico, New York, Oklahoma, Washington State, South Dakota. I'm sure that I'm leaving some out, but it's really, really fun to get to interact with everybody from community members to healthcare providers to tribal health system leaders to researchers from community-based settings and university-based settings. We do community-based participatory research. So a lot of the work I do is focused on building relationships and understanding what community priorities are and community needs are from the perspective of community members and community leaders. And then trying to match that to what types of research we can get funding for and who we have as partners and our expertise internally to do the research that's needed and wanted by the community, by the Alaska Native community. So I think my job also includes a lot of emails like Erin's. It included a lot of travel before the pandemic. I do a lot of writing. I write papers for journals. I write grants. I do a lot of grant writing. I go to a lot of project meetings. I mentor, I won't say younger, or junior, but I mentor researchers who are still developing their skills. And well, I'm still developing my skills every day. So, and I learn a lot from other researchers too. So I work with students a fair amount. Increasingly, I get to work with students, which is really fun. But all of the work I do is applied research. So I am not doing teaching in any formal capacity, and I am really focused around trying to support improvements in the healthcare system and in health outcomes for Alaska Native people through research. So let's see. What else can I tell you? What else should I say, Ruby?
Maybe you can talk a little about what you wish you had known before you either started your job or kind of started your career trajectory.
Yeah, I think probably it would have been helpful for me to know, and this isn't related to anthropology specifically, but I think every story has its own coherence. And I think oftentimes earlier in our stories, we don't always see how coherent they really are when we're still exploring and or earlier in our exploration and figuring things out. I came to Alaska. I was born and raised in Kansas, and I went to college in Massachusetts, and then I went back to Kansas and got my master's degree. And I was really just exploring. I loved anthropology and I wanted to know more about it. And that's why I went and got my master's degree. And then that's when I really fell in love with doing community-based research, and went on to get my PhD, but then turned towards doing clinical hospital-based research, and came to Alaska on vacation like a lot of people and fell in love with it when I was getting my PhD, and I decided I wanted to live here and that I wanted to work here. So I went back home thinking my advisor was going to tell me like I needed to buckle down and focus on finishing, and then I could go do whatever I wanted. But she said she thought that it was really important that we have to be passionate about the work that we do, and that at some point when you're getting a graduate degree, you really want to throw it out the window, and you need that passion to pull you back and remind you why you're doing the work and why you need to persist in finishing. And so she told me I should come to Alaska, I should follow my passion, I should find an organization to work with that I could use to support myself and also to learn about the place and the people while I was figuring out where to do my research. So I ended up working for the National Park Service, which was a completely new thing for me. I had never done anything like that before. And I lived out in Port Ellsworth, and it was an opportunity for me to learn about the rural communities and to get to know people from the rural communities and to listen to them and to begin learning about what their lives were like and what their priorities were and their concerns. And I initially thought, because I was really at that time focused on youth and health. And from doing a lot of reading, I thought, oh, I think it would be great. And I'd done behavioral health research and practice before. And I thought, great, I think I'll focus on youth suicide. And that seems like a really important area for practice and research. And very quickly realized that was not going to work for me, being an outside non-native researcher working on a really sensitive topic that is really hard for anybody to do research on, and might not be the priority of the community. And so through my conversations with elders and youth and community members, I listened and learned that subsistence, and especially the role of subsistence in youth well-being, was really important to people. And so we flipped it upside down, and instead of looking at youth suicide, I looked at youth well-being, and what were the subjective, or in other words, what were youths feeling and thinking and saying about their own well-being and what was important to them for their future and their aspirations. And that was something that the community was really supportive of. And so it took me a long time because I made a big change right in the middle of my degree. And so I had to really be patient and learn a lot, but eventually I finished. And then looking back, I can see that there was a coherence to that story, even though at the time there were moments where I wasn't sure what that was. So I think that's something that I somebody told me earlier when I was struggling with that question. And so I think it's important for other people to know that going forward when they're still in the middle of their education and figuring things out, that all of our stories have a coherence. I also think that it would be, if I had it to do over again, I think that was one of the questions. I probably wouldn't change anything because I love where I'm at and I wouldn't want to risk changing that. But there have been times where I think as a medical anthropologist in a clinical setting, it would be very, very helpful. And yeah, it would just be very helpful to have a clinical degree of some sort or a skill-based degree, if that's fair to say, like a master's of social work or a degree in medicine or nursing, or a master's of public health, which is oftentimes offered. There are a lot of degree programs where you can get a clinical degree or a public health degree with an anthropology degree, and they complement each other so well. And I think it's not necessary, but it's definitely, if you have the inclination, like I do, to want to be actually providing services as well as researching them, or just to understand what it's like to be a provider in a healthcare system. Then I think that's something to think about. So I think I've probably taken more than my time and I've talked a lot. So I'm going to stop and let you move on unless there are other questions.
This is so great. And actually next up on the schedule is Norma Johnson. And we know that she's in another session wrapping up another talk. So we have a little time, or perhaps depending on when Norma joins us, Julie, I wonder if you might be willing to go next and we could swap you and Norma on the schedules to give her a little breathing room to settle in when she gets here.
Yeah, absolutely. No problem.
Norma just joined.
Actually, she's just
She's here.
joining. So let's see how, Norma, we're so sorry that you had to jump from another session into this session. So we were just saying, if you need a little breathing room or time to settle, we can ask Julie to go and then we can introduce you. Not to put you on the spot, but how do you feel about that?
I'm assuming that was to me. I heard like,
Oh, I'm sorry.
50% of that.
Yeah, that was, hi, Norma, welcome. And I was just saying, I'm sorry that you've had to jump from session to session. If you're feeling ready, we can introduce you, or we would offer to have Julie go and then just to give you a little breathing room, but depends on what your schedule looks like.
Well, since the other session is literally my session, I guess I'll go really quick so I can hop back over in
Please,
there.
please.
I apologize.
No, don't apologize at all. We're sorry that you have a tight schedule today. So I will turn it over to Maureen to introduce you, and thanks for being here.
Thank you, Norma. Thank you so much. So I will present Norma Johnson. She's a tribal member of the Kenite Indian tribe and Gulkana Native Village. Norma graduated from UAA with a master in late 2019, and now she's in the Masters of Legal Studies program in Indigenous People Law at University of Oklahoma College of Law. She's an SOI. I'm not sure what SOI stands for. Norma, if you wanna.
Secretary of the Interior Qualified.
Thank you. Secretary of the Interior Qualified Indigenous Archaeologist, working as the Deputy THPO for Chickaloon Village Traditional Council. Thank you very much, Norma, for being here today.
Yeah, as indicated, I've had to jump Zooms pretty quickly. So as said, I am actually continuing my education with a Master's of Indigenous Peoples Law. And that kind of comes out of dealing with the last 2 years of a very problematic PA agreement that my tribe has signed. So I am looking at all of the different avenues of helping my people the best way I possibly can. So my title is actually, I'm a Deputy TIPO for Chickaloon Native Traditional Council. When I signed up for the conference and everything, I wasn't quite clear on what I was being hired for at that time. So I've been really working on a lot of policy lately, and that kind of comes forth of everything that I've been experiencing in the CRM world for the last few years. I've been doing CRM since undergrad, mostly lab work until I graduated. I've had some really amazing mentors along the way. I've built a really substantial social media network of Native scholars, scientists, and other archaeologists. I attended NAFPO, which is the National Association of Tribal Historic Preservation Officers, last week. I made some amazing connections through the BIA, the ACHP, and other SHPOs across the state, not SHPOs in our state, but other states. So I've really been building a whole network of people that I can reach out to when I have difficulties in the field, difficulties on a job and contracts and so forth. So I recognize that I am very new to archaeology in the field. My experience is not as vast as some of people's, but I'm smart enough to realize I need help, and I reach out for help when I need it. So with my new position, I've been doing a lot of policy writing. One thing that's become very clear in Section 106, it helps when a tribe has protocols and so forth in place when an agency comes to them for consultation. So that is what I've been doing recently, is I've been speaking to other tribes, other agencies, reading papers and stuff on consultation. I've basically been living in tribal consultation the last 3-4 months now, to get these protocols and policies in place that is both protects the tribe's interests, but also is fair when dealing with the agencies. So that's kind of what I've been doing for the most part. I'm also helping out with a lot of Section 106 reviews, PA agreements and everything. And my experience in the field is hopefully in the long run going to help protect the tribes in the long run when these PAs come out. I am definitely, I have the fancy, expensive pieces of papers on the back of my walls that show that I'm SOI qualified. I have the Western training needed to do this job, but I have the traditional knowledge and the background there that gives me a different outlook on a lot of these projects. I approach these projects differently. And I've learned the hard way that not a lot of archaeologists respect the traditional values, the traditional views on these projects. And I've hit a lot of brick walls with that. So that's kind of me in a nutshell and what I've been doing since I graduated. I hope that helps. I hope that's what you guys were looking for. Kind of a little flustered jumping between sessions and everything.
I know,
so.
Norma, thank you so much for being so flexible and being willing to jump over here. And we just have 1 minute left or so. And I'll just ask you, is there anything that, I mean, obviously you've had to do a lot of learning on the job, as you've said, you know, what you learned in school versus how the world of work, you know, differs. Is there anything that you would do differently if you could start over knowing what you know now in terms of like your education or your career choices early on?
I've actually been really thinking a lot about this, and I am considering going into a PhD to get out of this field now because of the recent issues I've had. I hate to think that my experiences are pushing me out of the field, but that's honestly how I feel. I have, my mentors have been amazingly ethical people who have instilled a lot of really great ethics in me. And I've encountered construction workers and other archaeologists that don't adhere to the same ethical standards I've had. And some of these people have come out of the UAF system. And that is really disheartening that they've come through the same academic system I have, but their ethics are so skewed away from tribal sovereignty, away from tribal views, that it's pushing those of us who are trying to give our tribes a voice out of the field. So hard truth, but that's kind of how I feel lately.
Well, we really appreciate your honesty and your candid input. And we feel like, I mean, I think I can speak for everyone here that the field needs people with your expertise and your perspective. So, but thank you so much for joining. I don't want to keep you because I know you need to jump back to your other session. We are recording this, so we hope you'll have a chance to review some of the other responses. And then if you can join us this afternoon for the open discussion, we'd love to have you.
Alrighty, I will do that then. Thank you so much. I appreciate it all.
Thank you, Norma. Thank you. And I'll hand it back over to Maureen to introduce Julie.
Yes. I'm gonna spotlight Julie for everyone. Hi. Hi, Julie.
Hi.
So Julie Hesdale has worked as an archaeologist for the U.S. Army Garrison for the last 10 years. She's employed by Colorado State University Center for Environmental Management of Military Lands, CEMML. Her undergraduate and master work was in anthropology and geology at University of Alberta, and her PhD is from Brown University, Department of Anthropology. She has been conducting archaeological work in Alaska and northwestern Canada for almost 30 years. Wow. Thank you, Julie. Thank you for being here today.
Hey, thanks for having me. Can everyone see my screen? I made
You can see it. Looks good.
Okay, great. So hopefully we've got some students or some people looking for careers here who want to get a glimpse into them. I see lots of people with active careers already in here, but that's great too. I wear kind of two hats. I work for the Army as the archaeologist for Fort Wainwright, and on the other hand, I work for Colorado State University as a research associate, where I'm I guess a subject matter expert working in the university system. But my day-to-day life is in Alaska. I work right here on Fort Wainwright, the base in Fairbanks, and get to Colorado once in a while, but mostly just communicate with them for administrative purposes and budgeting, all kinds of things like that. So I chose to talk sort of about what my day looked like, and then sort of what things I felt were most important that I learned through my career so far. Mostly I work on reports. Isn't that glamorous? So if you want to be an archaeologist in the contract field or working for a government agency, you're probably going to be writing most of the time, and I'm sure that's what the case is for almost all the archaeologists here. Let's see if I can forward there. Oh, so what does that look like sort of more in detail? I get to do a little bit of background research kind of stuff. Mostly I do spend a lot of time gathering data from people. I usually have a field crew that works for me in the summer that makes lots and lots of data, gathering that from folks and then getting all that into a report format so that we can communicate with the SHPO. Some of this is for a sort of annual kind of reports. Some of this is for letters about specific projects that we use for Section 106 correspondence, but lots and lots of writing and formatting. And that's mostly what I do during the day. At least that's about 50% of my duties. Another quarter of my duties are purely administrative. So signing timesheets, hiring new people, buying batteries, working on proposals for funding for next year's awards, creating budgets, recreating budgets, lots and lots of spreadsheets and math. I spend really more time than I would like to on spreadsheets, but that's sort of what the administrative part looks like. And then I threw in a couple of fun things there because I work in a really nice office, so I always have time for tea and chocolate in the afternoon too. But I'll put that in my quarter percent of the time. I need to have that in there. And then other things that come up throughout the day, the other quarter of my day is sort of the fun stuff. So that could be
working on public outreach, doing things like this, communicating with our stakeholders, other archaeologists, members of the Fairbanks community, members of the tribes that we work with on a regular basis. A little bit of time goes towards collaborative projects. I like to work with universities to do scientific research on some of the sites that we're finding on Army lands. And so I spend a little bit of time on that. Most of the things though are just, the daily, somebody comes into your office and asks you this or that, you spend a whole lot of time figuring out things that other people can't figure out. And then I put in there just kind of jokingly getting things unstuck. There's always some sort of adventure with an ATV or a truck in the snow or in the mud or something like that. So there's all those practical things too that we do on a daily basis. In the summer, things change a lot and my schedule sort of flips on its head. And so I still spend lots of time on reports because those are never done. I'm always behind on those. But 70% of my time is spent on logistics. That's getting people in and out of the field, making sure their days are organized so they can work effectively, making sure they have everything they need in terms of vehicles, access to certain areas, equipment, all sorts of different things like that. So I spend 90% of my days in the summer sort of, being the field manager, directing all the operations. And really, if you want to think about, what did I learn in school, that was never one of those things. I think one of the reasons I've been able to do my job works or, appreciated for doing my job is that I can get things done, and especially things with lots of moving parts. So if you're a person who has a hard time getting yourself to a dentist appointment, that's something you're going to want to work on, because in any career, you need to be able to manage multiple moving parts and keep yourself organized, have some sort of system to get you through not just today, but what's seeing forward, what's happening a week from now and 2 months from now, and maybe even a year from now. You're always planning things on lots of different time scales. And so that's probably where my skills have gotten me the furthest. And that's probably something that you can't really learn in school, and you really have to learn by doing. And then I just wanted to put in here, I think, just from a perspective of moving forward in a career, if you're a younger person and it looks like, a big wide world open up there, you never know what direction you're going to go in. And I think the most important thing is, while you're on your path, is to make lots of different personal connections. And I was reading this from a blog post from a guy who does a lot of career counseling, and he said the same thing. So making personal connections, and that can be, it doesn't have to be academic connections. It could be like, Maureen and I both love bunnies, and so we talk about bunnies. Now we've just created a bond that might open us up to working together in the future, little things like that. So I think getting to know people on personal levels helps you for sure with getting jobs. Most of the people I hire have worked with somebody I know in the past. It helps you with your trust relationships with your regulators, for sure. So that can always help sort of pave the way to make things go more smoothly. It helps you with your trust relationships with your tribal members that you're working with, other stakeholders, and it really helps you create opportunities down the road. So if you don't know how to make these relationships, go talk to your professors. If you're working in the community, go chat with people in that community. Everyone likes to talk and likes to be listened to. Volunteer for things, apply for every job, ask questions. Lots of people like to talk about themselves. So everyone's happy to make connections with you if you reach out. So I think that would be my biggest take-home message. And then I'm just plugging my work for this summer since we don't have a career forum this year, but we're looking for folks to work at Fort Wainwright in lots of different avenues, not just archaeology, but also some historic building works, some GIS, some wetlands biologists, some invasive species people. So if you have any friends in other disciplines that are looking for work this summer, send them my way.
Thank you, Julie. Thank you so much. And if you can stick around for some of the discussion later and this afternoon, I'd love to touch a little bit more on the idea of building relationships and personal connections and, you know, networking, which some people are wary of that term, but you know, when I was young in the field, I always felt like, okay, is this schmoozing? Is this kind of kissing up, or is this networking? And where's the line? And what does that look like? Because I kind of didn't want to build relationships with an expectation of something in return, but I did find always that those relationships that I built early on with professionals who had more experience than me in the field really did benefit me. And so how can a young, we can talk about this later, and I'm going to introduce Monica next, but we can talk about, you know, how can a young or emerging professional build those relationships without feeling kind of uncomfortable with it. So next, I'm really pleased to introduce another friend and colleague, Monica Shah. Monica is the Deputy Director of Collections and Conservation at the Anchorage Museum. She's originally from Anchorage, but considers both Alaska and India her home. Her formal training is in archaeology and art conservation. She obtained a BA from Bryn Mawr College and a Master's of Science from Winterthur University of Delaware. Before joining the museum, she operated a private conservation practice, serving a variety of museums, culture centers, and Native corporations around the state, including the UA Museum of the North, Hoona Indian Association, Ukpiagvik Native Corporation, the Inupiat Heritage Center, and Lake Clark National Park. She has worked at the Smithsonian Museum Conservation Institute, the National Museum of the American Indian, University of Pennsylvania Museum, Museum of Archaeology in Trondheim, Norway, and the National Park Service here in Alaska. She's a past board member of the statewide museums organization, serves as a board member of the Alaska Community Foundation, and is passionate about heritage access, preservation, and decolonizing museum practices. She lives in Anchorage with her husband, daughter, and cat. Monica, thanks so much for being here with us today.
Thank you, Sheena. Thank you for inviting me to share some of my career and background with whomever might listen to this later, as well as the people today. I thought I would share a little bit because my trajectory is very different than I think what some of the other people on this panel have had. I studied Middle Eastern or Near Eastern and Mediterranean archaeology as an undergraduate. And in my mind, I thought I was going to be in that part of the world for the rest of my life, studying and researching and doing what I was passionate about as an 18, 19-year-old. But instead, I came back here, and because of the skills that I learned in college, which I think everyone here has mentioned about being able to write and research, I was able to get a job at the National Park Service. And that changed my life because it exposed me to the full breadth of what archaeology and anthropology meant. I worked in the Cultural Resources Office here in Anchorage, and there were so many different people who exposed me to different avenues. Subsistence anthropology work, research, medical anthropology, things that I had not really seriously considered. Also history and heritage preservation. And it spoke to me in a way that I realized that even though I love archaeology and I love the detective work and I love the research aspect of it, really for me, the part that resonated and that drove my passion is working with living people and working with communities and building those relationships and supporting those relationships. And I see today now, 25 plus years later, 30 almost actually, where that trajectory brought me, which is here at the museum. Along the way, I got to work on some really amazing archaeological sites. I got to work at a variety of museums. My master's in conservation allowed me to work with material culture, which I loved that aspect of archaeology, but also working with communities and living communities where culture preservation, heritage preservation was so important, and what I saw as important and resonated with me with my life. And so I ended up here, and I thought I would just kind of describe what I do here and what a day in my life here to give people a sense of that. Today, it's a lot of administrative, a lot of making connections with people, partners, but also with my colleagues here at the museum and supporting the work they do. But I also keep my hand in. I get to install exhibitions, I move collections. I work with Erin pretty closely on donations and acquisitions. I co-chair the acquisitions committee here. And I love working and seeing that aspect, working with donors and artists and buying art along with other staff members. It is a huge variety, and I don't think as a young archaeologist, when I was an undergraduate and volunteering at the University of Pennsylvania Museum, that I ever imagined that this is where I would end up. I think that I thought that I would do sort of the typical, I'll go to get my master's in archaeology, anthropology, get my PhD, figure something out. Not sure what, but I had a couple things that really made differences. Like I mentioned, the mentors that I had at the National Park Service who allowed me or nurtured my desire to help people and work with communities so that I was lent out, even though I worked for the National Register program and was writing National Register nominations and NHL nominations and public archaeology kind of work. I got lent out in the summers to other programs. So I got to go to parks around the state and go into smaller communities, meet people. I also got to work on a disaster at the Kodiak, at the Russian Orthodox archives. And that's where I met conservators for the first time. And so, and then a colleague friend at the Park Service made connections for me at the University of Pennsylvania's conservation lab at their museum. And it just kind of fell out. It kind of, I wound this path. I mean, the reason I got a job at the National Park Service, I filled in for somebody on maternity leave because the woman saw that the one who hired me, Susan Morton at the time, who's since passed, but she saw on my resume that I had worked with a professor who she had known, and it just was chance. And then also that I had just come back from India trying to work on an excavation site, and the professor hadn't worked out. And she'd had the same thing happen to her 20 years earlier. And so she felt this connection with me. And, who would have known that somebody in Anchorage had had the same experience in India as I had, and she's not Indian. And so it was just one of those kind of serendipitous kind of things. And I still remember other archaeologists taking me to the little AAAs for my first little AAA in Fairbanks and letting me just sleep in their hotel room because I didn't have enough money to get my own room, and meeting, all these people that I was reading their books to learn about Alaskan archaeology and anthropology. I think of those little moments where people have helped and taken the time to mentor. And so I do spend my time hopefully doing that as much as I can. And that my team here are a variety of backgrounds. For a little while, there were a lot of archaeologists here at the museum, and now it's moved away. But there's, Erin, there's anthropologists that are working here and have sort of made their path into museums. And I think that as a young person starting out in this career, to really think about that is what aspects of archaeology or anthropology do you really love, and then to follow that path. And I think it was Jennifer Shah who mentioned that being passionate about what you want to do really makes all the difference. If you're not passionate and you're just kind of going through the motions, it can lead you to paths that are boring and make you not really do your work really well. And I know Norma has stepped away, but some of what she said resonated with me because I did have a lot of trouble with this idea that we're supposed to be working for communities and working towards supporting living people. And how do I do that with archaeology? And so that's why I kind of stepped away, but I still support it. And I still was lucky enough to work on archaeological conservation projects. So getting to go to sites, as well as supporting Alaskan archaeology projects that were, in the north and northwest of Alaska, which was really fantastic. And I see I've run out of time, so I'm gonna,
That's great.
unless there's a question, otherwise we can move on.
it's perfect timing, Monica. And I would just say, like, later on, if you're able to stick around when you talk about your community work, I'm sure folks would. So yesterday we held a session on climate change and accelerated erosion at cultural resource sites, and Dr. Rick Connect presented on Nunalik. And perhaps you could share a little bit more about your experience helping them and being a part of their development of their community cultural center, where they're curating a lot of material from that site. So hold that, and I'll hand it over to Maureen to introduce Kevin. Thanks for being here, Kevin.
Thank you all for being here. Give me just a second. Thank you very much. So thank you, Kevin, for being here today. Kevin graduated from the University of Alaska Fairbanks in 2021 with a major in anthropology and political science. Kevin has attended the Model Arctic Council in Finland in 2018, the Arctic Futures 2050 conference in 2019, and an exchange at University Heidelberg in 2020, as well as continued his interest in anthropology and political science today through his experiences in Alaska and around the world. Kevin values community building, culture exchange, and fostering a genuine passion for the world as a central focus of his studies. Kevin is fluent in both English and Chinese, and is practicing German and Russian. On campus, Kevin served as the KSUA Radio 91.5 FM production director, a former virtual intern for the U.S. State Department Office of Ocean and Polar Affairs, focused on Arctic youth engagement, and Kevin was also a former undergraduate research fellow studying gaps in care for students on campus related to medical anthropology. He is involved as a BLAST, biomedical learning and science training undergraduate researcher. And finally, he is the president of the Anthropology Society. Thank you, Kevin. Currently, Kevin is working with the Alaska Center ICE as an innovation fellow. Okay, that's all yours.
Thanks, Maureen. That was a long bio. I apologize. It's kind of my like CV resume that I've been using recently. So we'll just work with that. I can share screen maybe, but also if not, I can also just talk directly.
No, let me just give you co-host
Yeah,
responsibilities, Kevin. Hang on one second.
So some pictures and to share on this beautiful Thursday afternoon, or yeah, morning still.
Let me get to your,
No worries.
now that I've spotlighted him, Maureen, I can't seem to, remove spotlight, there we go.
Yeah.
Real quick, then I
That's
will
good. Thanks.
give you, where are you? Oh, there you are. Hi, okay, make co-host. You should be able to
Perfect.
share your screen now. You'll have a little arrow there at the bottom.
Awesome. I think you can see it now.
Yeah.
Yeah, so my name is Kevin Huo. I am a co-host of Speaking Anthropology. Thank you, Maureen. And I also want to give a shout out to Barku, who's here today as well. I see in the guest list. Barku's been on our show, so Barku maybe can speak on this later through the chat, but I'll just dive into it. This is a Zoom photo that is very recognizable to all of us, but essentially what Dylan and I, my co-host and I, do on this radio show is we talk about anthropology and play music. That's really it. We play music that anthropologists, archaeologists listen to in the field. But let me talk a little bit more about how that came about. So in 2019, Dylan and I were both undergrads at UAF in the anthropology department. Both kind of co-running the Anthropology Society as well. We're super interested in kind of bringing the conversation of what anthropologists are talking about, thinking about after class. So, that hallway discussion that you're having, after your professor discusses a topic into a podcast radio show. And at that time, we reached out and got our show going. This is 2019 and this was 2021. So as we can imagine with COVID and everything, Dylan came up to from New York back to Fairbanks, which is originally his home. And we got to meet again, but yeah, 2 years later, now 3 years, of course. Our radio show is kind of interesting. By the numbers, we've had a total of 63 episodes. We're on 3 platforms, 3,780 hours of recording, which is kind of, minutes. Wow, that's wrong. And 700 listens. And it's been 2.5 years. kind of what our show is all about. And you can visit our website here to listen more, and I'll drop the link in afterwards. But our show is really focused on kind of connecting the dots between anthropologists and that science communication aspect. We spend a lot of our time discussing movies and films, music that you listen to, and kind of like the research that anthropologists are working on across Alaska. And so kind of bringing that into the forefront of discussion is really helpful. I think as a student personally, the reason why we started the show selfishly was to figure out what our homework assignments were beyond the classroom and beyond working on the assignments ourselves. But it's been really fruitful. We've gotten a chance to meet a lot of great faculty and staff and folks from across Alaska and around the world. And it's just boosted our confidence as anthropologists as well. If you're interested in joining our show, more than happy to invite you on the show. So all of our speakers here today, I will be emailing you guys to join us if you're interested, to talk a little bit more about anthropology and of course play some great music. It's kind of surprising. We have a Spotify playlist, and we have a collection of literally all the music that anthropologists listen to, and believe it or not, it's very varied. And as we all are from different backgrounds and experiences, I think it builds to it. So I definitely want to invite you to the show. Anyone even on the call today, if you're an anthropologist, if you're not an anthropologist, we want to talk to you about anthropology. And we have one question that we always ask at the end, and I'm happy to allow folks to drop in the chat, but the question is, what is anthropology? And feel free to answer in the chat if you want. The second half of today's conversation is just kind of me talking a little bit about my current experience and an opportunity as well that I'd like to share with everyone. So I am an anthropology major that graduated last spring, but nowadays I'm actually working on entrepreneurship and business here in Alaska, which is very different from what I think a lot of folks are, working on post, grad. They're probably pursuing a master's, they're pursuing a PhD, right? Whereas I kind of jumped into this new experience. It's the Alaska Fellows Program, a fantastic program, which I think I get a lot of questions these days beyond, in the past it was, why did you move to Alaska? And now it's, how are you applying your anthropological experience and being the anthropologist in an entrepreneurial ecosystem? So I was just going to run through the program. We're at 4 sites based in Fairbanks, Anchorage, Juneau, Sitka. So if there are any students, recent grads, if you're interested in applying to the program, please reach out and let me know. We'd like to have you apply. These are some of the organizations that the program is a part of. As you can see, there's a variety of them. I work for Alaska Center ICE directly, so that's the Innovation, Commercialization, Entrepreneurship. Some of the nitty-gritty details, which I'll just show on screen here, of how the experience in the work is. This is kind of a post-grad opportunity for students, or grads from a few years later to work with a community organization and kind of improve the Alaskan community. So it's kind of the whole idea and the motto and mission of the program was to reverse the brain drain kind of attitude of bringing students and folks and young professionals back to Alaska to work in the community. And the application process is very straightforward. But, I think I'm just going to end this sharing here. But the last few notes I want to say is kind of my experiences working as a fellow currently in the entrepreneurial ecosystem has been unique because I'm applying a lot of my anthropology skills of interviewing and networking and connecting with people, being conscientious of the values that they have. At the same time, trying to innovate and ideate new designs, right? In the entrepreneurial world, it's all about making money and all about creating ingenious ideas. And so I think as an anthropologist coming into that ecosystem, it's been refreshing for many of the entrepreneurs meeting me, getting a chance to talk to me about their experiences. We end up chatting more about, an example, how their dog is, how their favorite football team is playing, right? And these experiences then add on to our conversations of what issues are we facing in the community and how can we resolve them together. So yeah, I hope I answered some of the questions that have been brought up, but it's kind of my experience as a student turned into a fellow, working and learning along the way, picking up things. I think Aaron mentioned earlier today, critical thinking is really important. I think that's one of the biggest skills that I am trying to figure out how to use and apply into my everyday work. When you have an entrepreneur in rural Alaska looking to build a off-the-grid microgrid, how do you work with the local people, the engineers at a company, and then also the government, right, to get things approved? And so that connecting the dots moment has been occurring and reoccurring quite consistently, and it's been really nice to bring them all together. So yeah, I hope that's a good answer to some of the questions that I talked about. Yeah.
That was great, Kevin. Thank you so much. And it's incredible all the things that you're involved in. I'd love to, we have time between now and the noon break to just open it up to everyone for questions for our panelists this afternoon. We're also going to be joined by Kyle Wark, Lindsay Simmons, Rob Bowman, and Travis Hedwig. And even though we didn't have time to fit them into the discussion this morning in terms of the 10-minute time slots, I wanted to also welcome, I think some of them are on this morning. And so I would love to, have, discussion, questions, if anyone wants to pop in the chat or take yourself off mute. Okay, here's a question in the chat. Are there opportunities through the Alaska Fellows Program that have to do with heritage management at all?
Yeah, definitely. I think there are a few new program opportunities popping up right now. So actually the applications for anyone who's interested are due in April. So if you're going to apply, now's a good time. There's a listing of programming, but yeah, there's one that's currently working with Sea Alaska Heritage Foundation down in Juneau, I believe. The one with the Museum of the North, they're hiring fellows. And the work that you do as a fellow is kind of unique. I think you get a chance to work on projects that your supervisors are interested in, but you can also pursue something yourself. And I hope there are more connections to be made, maybe with the museum down in Anchorage as well. The fellowship is always growing, and I think Christina had mentioned in chat. And so it's about connecting folks. And if you are looking for a fellow yourself, if your organization would like to hire a fellow, that's an opportunity as well. And we'd like to connect with you and put you in touch with the executive director.
Julie, I wanted to go back to something that you said about getting things unstuck. And when you said that, I kind of thought initially that you were talking about that kind of in a figurative sense in the administrative world, the administrative life also portion of your career life. So I just thought of how many times, when I was working with the state, for example, you get things unstuck, maybe literally out in the field and figuratively in the process of the work that you're doing and the administrative tasks as well. I thought that was something worth bringing up, and maybe you can talk about that a little bit too.
Yeah, no, I guess I was playing with it there a little bit. I just come back. I was playing with it a little bit there. I had just come back from the Tanana Flats where we had to dig out UTVs that have been sitting in all the snow that we've had up here in Fairbanks, Alaska, and get them out because you can only do it during the winter. But also definitely in terms of just problem solving in general for how to do things. And I think actually working with the SHPO's office has been a lesson on this, sometimes frustrating, sometimes not frustrating, but there are lots of different ways to solve one problem, right? And so sometimes, when you have limited experience, you go at it from one direction, and it takes other people, working with other people for sure, to give you ideas about how to come at it from a different angle. And so a lot of the work that we do is figuring it out from a different angle. And I think I've been helped by just being open to different perspectives. And sometimes the people that teach me things are much younger and have much less experience, but they just have a novel way of thinking of things. And other times it's seasoned veterans. But I think, again, I think Norma had to leave again, but just having all sorts of different perspectives definitely helps
figure out different ways to solve problems that might be better than the path that you initially were taking. Anyone else want to chime in on that?
I was just going to say, I like that idea of, looking at and learning about and listening to different perspectives when you're approaching a problem. And I think that's one of the things that sometimes it's difficult to learn as a undergraduate or even as a graduate student sometimes, because you're so focused on going to your professors for advice and helping and unless they're a fantastic professor, because sometimes they force you to figure out how to get unstuck. But I think sometimes you don't get that opportunity early in your career. And so just to think about that, even if you may not have the choice to be the direction, but to take that on in your own mind at least, and to work on those kinds of problems and figuring out how you might approach something and how you might move through a problem.
I think generally it might be helpful for panelists to discuss any opportunities for emerging professionals and students to get involved in their respective organizations in whichever capacity they can.
I'll chime in here real quick. I think like a lot of you, I think Monica and I met probably 100 years ago in the field in Kotzebue, but we had early experiences together going to the Alaska Anthro meetings, and just touching on what she said, where, people were letting her sleep on their couch in the hotel room. These meetings are not so great when they're not in person, although we do have opportunities to meet with people that we would never meet with, because we can get all the international folks in and people that can't travel. But really, these meetings have been super good for me over the years. And there's lots of opportunities for volunteer work within the Alaska Anthropological Association. There's board positions, but there's also internships with the board, just to get your hands dirty a little bit and help out. That would put you in contact with lots of different people from lots of different agencies if you're looking to, figure out work opportunities or collaboration opportunities. Talking to other students at these meetings is invaluable. You have a cohort of folks your age, and they have connections. And so when you work together, you have a lot more connections. I've been sitting here feeling like I'm starting to get into being one of the older generation, because this meeting has been put on by a bunch of people that have worked for me in the past, and they all sound so mature and organized and professional. And I didn't realize when I had gotten this old, I guess. But yeah, I think this association, it's everybody's association. It doesn't belong to the old archaeologists, and young people have lots to contribute to it. I think if you look at our board right now, I think half of them are probably well under 40, and it's really changing the association in really great directions. I think there's been a lot more anthropology. For years it was so archaeology focused, and now it's gotten to be a lot more inclusive of lots of different perspectives. And I think it's like the younger folks that are coming in and have been brought up to recognize the importance of that are really moving the association forward and making it more accessible for lots of different folks.
Yeah, I agree everything that Julie said. I think, when I attended my first little AAA I don't even know, 18 years ago as an undergrad, and just it's kind of building the relationship. So maybe my professor would introduce me to somebody, or Aaron's interested in this. I remember getting invited to a now retired anthropologist's house, and it was kind of a who's who of Alaskan archaeology, anthropology, and I was the only undergrad at this house party essentially. And on one level it was intimidating, but on another level I saw it as this huge opportunity to basically just get my face out there and try to network and kind of explain my area of interest, which again at that time it was tended to be pretty archaeology heavy. I mean, when I graduated, I would say probably 3/4 of my cohort were archaeologists, and there was only one other Alaska Native who was interested in cultural anthropology at the time. But I think you just building on that, volunteering, I think is a great opportunity. You never know what opportunities will present themselves. I've had opportunities when I was, still going to school that I didn't take, but I could have seized upon. And again, I think part of it is, I think with what Monica was saying, you may think you have an idea of what you want to do, but you may try something that you think you're going to hate and you end up actually loving it. And it's, you think that you want to go play in the dirt, but you actually want to work with living people or whatnot. Or maybe the first job that you get, who do you end up meeting? It's funny, when I started at the Alaska Native Heritage Center, Monica still had her consulting business and was doing some work with the Heritage Center. So that's where I first met her. And then who knew that, 3 or 4 years later, that we'd both be working at the Anchorage Museum. I don't think that was anything that either of us had necessarily envisioned, but it worked out that way. And, things change. But I think, the other thing about Alaska is it is a pretty small network. And in this day and age with social media, I have people that want to, that reach out and friend me, and I see what the connections are. And there are some people that I've never even met in person, or maybe I've met them once, but I'm certainly aware of their work. And so following that up, I think, and kind of just keeping your finger on the pulse of what's going on in Alaska and what opportunities exist.
I'll speak to Ruby's question about what are the opportunities for people. And the Anchorage Museum has a variety of opportunities, which are on our website for seasonal work, as well as, which is mostly for front of house staff. But the work that Erin and I do does require a level of expertise. So it's sometimes difficult for people to get their foot in the door. And so I highly encourage volunteering. Right now, my department is not having volunteers come in yet because of COVID, but that hopefully will be changing soon. But I think it is a way to, and especially if you've shown that you have good handling skills, because those are the kinds of things that we're looking for. Is I'm sure you're all aware, not all anthropologists and archaeologists actually have good handling skills. And we, things that we handle are delicate. And so those are important things, attention to detail. I don't know who it was that mentioned that, maybe it was Julie, but, or Jennifer, but, we do a lot of tracking and a lot of detail work. And so wanting people who are careful, those are things that I see in my department. And there are, obviously a variety of people come in different ways to the work that we do, but you do have to enjoy things being put in their place, describing them, and, these kinds of things that a lot of people in field work enjoy, but they realize, or maybe they do, but they don't enjoy. They enjoy being in the soil, and they enjoy that anticipation and that discovery. That may be maybe not back of house museum work for you, but then there are interns in curatorial and in education, and there's ways to apply the knowledge that you all have firsthand experience doing. And so I think those are opportunities that you should look at, especially here at the museum, because I don't know about curatorial interns right now, but the education department has interns all the time, and we've had plenty of anthropologists who either do work here as educators or have come through there, and those are opportunities to apply the skills that you're learning. And it may not be a forever position, but it's an exposure and allows you to see what you might be good at and what you might want to do in the future.
Yeah, I think you're right, Monica. It is another way to get your foot in the door. And, the other thing is that the museum, we're a bit fortunate in that we represent art, history, science, and culture. So we're not focused on one thing. And there's a lot of cross cross collaborations on different things. There's, the curatorial department works very closely with the education department on a lot of things. The collections department works with the education department, our archives, and that's another thing thinking about, for me, I don't like to dig in the dirt, but I do like digging through archives. And in some ways that sense of discovery can also be satiated that way. But, it's just a different way of thinking. But again, there's also, I was just to do a plug, there's a lot of small institutions around our state that represent archives and collections and small museums. And sometimes that's some of the best training if you really want to get into museum work, because it forces you are the one and only problem solver, and it makes you think outside of the box on how you can do good work even in a small institution.
I think also just going back, just as a note, going back to one of the speaker's comments about how Alaska is so small, everybody is connected to everyone else. And to piggyback off of Erin's, like if I don't know somebody, I probably know somebody who knows somebody, or at least know where to look. And so if you are nervous about reaching out to people, ask somebody who to maybe make a soft introduction between them, or kind of get some background information on that individual, so you don't feel like you're just cold calling people for opportunities or for insight or advice. I would definitely recommend that.
Yeah, I think that's really important advice, and something I was wanting to touch on earlier. Early in my professional career, I knew, because I had heard from others, how important making those connections are. But, I was always kind of like, am I schmoozing? Is this trying to schmooze? Or what is this? Is this networking? Is this person going to know that I have underlying intentions of like them trying, me wanting to try to get a job with them or something? And so maybe the panelists can talk a little bit about when a young or emerging professional approaches you, help the folks here today understand that you expect that and you understand that, and you don't necessarily perceive it as schmoozing or kissing up or just trying to get a job. I mean, that's just part of the world of work and how you get into the world of work.
Yeah, I mean, I've never seen it as, there is a level of schmoozing. If you're not good at it, then you're probably not going to go as far as you could. But at the same time, if somebody approaches me, or when I approached somebody, it's just part of building relationships. I don't think of it as schmoozing. I think about it as building relationships. And it might also be that somebody comes to me with what they're passionate about, and then 6 months later, or a year, or 5 years down the road, there might be an opportunity that I'm aware of, or something to plug in, and I'll think about that person. There are people that I'm still in contact with, that I went to school with, that are doing some pretty amazing things, often in the periphery, that they'll send me a question, or I'll send them a question, and call upon them. So, I think by the nature of this kind of work, if you don't, if we study people, we should be able to interact with people. I'm just going to throw that out there as an anthropologist. And so if you're not good at that, then maybe this is not the field that you should be in, or it's strictly, if you just want to be in the background digging in the dirt or cataloging things, then okay, fine. But that really limits your options, I would say.
I think
what you said.
Sorry, go ahead, Ruby.
Or Monica, yeah, I was going to say that that's so funny that you say that, Erin. Is one of the things that a fundraising professional told me. This was maybe over 10 years ago, but I think it's true for every relationship that you're building, is that you shouldn't develop a relationship only when you need something. You really should be developing a relationship just because it's a relationship. And so I think that's where I look at it, is that if somebody doesn't need something from me, but they just want to get to know me or talk to me, I make time for all sorts of cold calls of young people entering the profession and just graduating. I just had one yesterday, and it's just a chance to get to know each other. There's no expectation of anything on either one of our parts. And I think that's something that people forget, because they only contact people when they need something. And that's feels a little icky sometimes. And so learning to do that is a good thing. And I think a lot of people have perhaps not learned that in their lives just because they haven't had an opportunity, and COVID doesn't help. But take the moment. How hard is it to make a Zoom call between you and one other person? They're free. And it's no, half an hour. You're not making somebody's huge obligation, but just be like, I would like to get to know you. And then you have to nurture it. You can't just drop it. Can't be one off, because nobody's going to remember that conversation. So just to think about that, the people that you meet here at Little AAAs are people you need to nurture beyond.
Thank you all. So it's noon and we're technically on a 20-minute break. Folks are welcome to stick around and engage in discussion, or if folks have questions, you can put them in the chat or take yourself off mute. Otherwise, we'll be back at 12:20 to continue the conversation. And this afternoon will be kind of more of an open forum. Maybe we can touch on some of these questions again, or other threads that people want to pick back up. So thank you so much for being here, and we'll be on break for just a little bit. Oh, thank you. Yes, thank you for remembering. Ruby and I are here, and I believe Maureen's here or coming back shortly. And we're just here to, kind of facilitate discussion or questions, but this afternoon session is supposed to be really open discussion, casual. I will read for you all the 5 questions that the panelists touched on, 1 or 2 each this morning, and that is, what does a day in the life of an anthropologist, archaeologist, or cultural resource professional really look like? What are the day-to-day tasks and skills that are really important in this work, perhaps unexpectedly so? What do you wish you learned about your profession in school? What have you had to learn on the job? And what would you do differently if you could start over, knowing what you know now? So those are kind of some prompts for you all to think about. And I'd like to welcome Travis, Hedwig, Rob Bowman. I believe that Lindsay Simmons is going to be joining us. I don't see her on quite yet this afternoon. And Kyle Wark. Thank you all so much for joining us as additional contributors to talking about your life and work in anthropology and cultural resources. So yeah, does anybody have any questions right off, or anything they wanted to follow up on from the morning session?
Sheena, can we just take this opportunity to introduce the new panelists as well, so people
Yes, please.
Context. So I'll introduce Kyle and Travis. Kyle Wark was born and raised in Hoonah, Alaska. His mother's family is Tlingit, and his father is non-native from Seattle. His mother's family is Daishitan Raven. Did I say that right, guys?
Daishitan.
Daishitan Raven, Beaver Clan, and his father is non-native from Seattle, later adopted by the
Tukanadi,
Eagle and Wolf Clan. He became an anthropologist to study his Tlingit people, and he has primarily researched the impacts of colonization on Alaska Native health and well-being. Kyle has joined Southcentral Foundation in July of 2017 and has worked on projects related to the ethics of genomic and genetic research, relationship health, social determinants of health, traditional foods, and a gene found almost exclusively among Inuit people. Is that the CPT1A? He has lived in Anchorage since 2008 and enjoys reading, playing Go, which is an ancient Chinese strategy game, picking berries, and spending time with his family. And Travis Hedwig is an applied cultural / medical anthropologist and assistant professor of health sciences at the University of Alaska Anchorage. His primary research interests involve impairment, and disability, and health inequality in the areas of housing and homelessness, fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, or FASD, mental health, behavioral health, and community-based systems of care. Travis has worked extensively on questions related to cultural adoption and kinship caregiving, child welfare, adolescent health, suicide prevention, community-engaged approaches to alcohol and substance misuse, risk prevention, and health advocacy. He is passionate about teaching and learning and enjoys the challenge of translating research into practice in collaboration with communities.
Great, and I'll introduce Rob and Lindsay, and I don't see Lindsay's back just yet, so Rob, I'll introduce you. Rob Bowman has over 13 years of experience in cultural resource management. He has completed projects in the American Southeast, Pacific Northwest, and Alaska. Rob has completed both his undergraduate and graduate studies at the University of, sorry, somebody's in the waiting room, at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. His areas of specialization include NHPA Section 106 and Section 110 compliance, AHPA compliance, ground penetrating radar survey analysis and reporting, prehistoric and historic site survey, testing and mitigation, field and laboratory geoarchaeological analyses, and prehistoric and historic artifact analysis. Rob is currently a project archaeologist at Northern Land Use Research, Alaska. Welcome, Rob. Thanks for joining us. And when Lindsay's back, I'll introduce her as well. So folks can give me a wave when she's in. We've had some great discussions this morning about, entering a career in anthropology or cultural resources or archaeology and all of the different, we have such a varied panel of professionals here joining us. So I don't know if Travis or Kyle or Rob, if you all, had some thoughts. We sent you those questions and they're also in the chat. Is there anything that you'd like to touch on? What do you wish you learned, or what would you have done differently, that sort of thing in your own career? And maybe you can talk a little bit about your background. Let's start with Kyle. If that's okay, not to put you on the spot.
No, that's fine. Yeah, I did get a chance to look over the questions. I haven't had a chance to really process them deeply. I was trying to think about them again, just as we were introducing each other here. I have been told that I'm adopted as a medical anthropologist. So my specific training was cultural anthropology. They don't actually have, I got my degree, master's in anthropology from UAA here in Anchorage, and they didn't have a medical anthropologist on staff or offer any classes in medical anthropology, but I kind of defaulted into it based on the research that I was doing. My thesis was looking at the colonial history of alcohol among my Tlingit people, and really looking at it as not so much in terms of alcoholism, which has been studied extensively, but looking at it as an object of material culture, as a food, as a beverage, as a trade good, as something that was brought into us from European communities, but then subsequently adopted into our own use patterns, and really explored that as a personal topic as well, because as I put in my abstract, I believe alcohol killed my mother. And that was really the impetus for studying that topic. It was not general anthropology or in the sense of just curiosity. It was intended to be applied anthropology. It was intended to try and help make sense of something within a cultural context that normally gets discussed in a medicalized context. And when it's discussed as a medical, within a medical framework, culture is often disregarded. You don't think in I can just say it like that. And so I was really trying to provide a cultural framework for understanding a Tlingit view of alcohol misuse, a Tlingit view of drunkenness, a Tlingit view of what abstinence or recovery might mean. And that's what my thesis really tried to explore. And so that led me into a lot of different topics around health and well-being, Tlingit views of the whole person and how a person becomes sick or why they become sick, and spiritual healing and a lot of these things, as well as topics like historical trauma that I talked about in my presentation in the other meeting room this morning, looking at cultural factors related to resilience and why some people don't struggle with alcohol as much as others do. So that type of research really led me into the work that I'm doing for Southcentral Foundation as a healthcare researcher. That's my kind of day-to-day work. Is we look at different aspects of health and engage in research embedded within a Native hospital. And it is very much applied anthropology. It's very much the type of work that I wanted to do. It's, you know, there's very much the potential for affecting people's lives. I think that was something Travis mentioned in his, or was put into his intro, was that, you know, finding ways to translate research into practice or guidelines or things that can impact people's lives. That's why I do this work. There's a delightful, no, not a delightful, impactful framework that I picked up in what's it called? Autoethnography from a Cuban anthropologist, Ruth Behar. Anthropology that does not break your heart is not worth doing. And I think there's a lot of power in that idea that we are invested in what we do. You know, we are part of the research that we do. You know, we are the research instrument, the person here, the mind and the personality and everything else that we are. Our identity is really how, you know, that's our microscope. You know, that's our lab bench. That's how we engage in research with the community, and we need to keep that in mind. And when we're studying these heavy, hard topics, they affect us, and that's okay. You know, that's part of what it means to study these issues, like, you know, historical trauma or boarding schools or alcoholism or suicide or all of these different things, and trying to find ways to take care of ourselves while we do that, enacting healthy boundaries, separating the work from your life. Those are also important as well. But recognizing that connection is also something that I think doesn't get mentioned enough in standard methodology courses and stuff like that. Day-to-day skills and tasks. So this came up in some of my methodology courses and other courses that I took at UAA, but team science is a big part of what I do. I work with psychologists and public health officials and you know, other types of healthcare researchers in my day-to-day job. And it's important to be able to translate what I see as a cultural anthropologist into their frameworks and understand where they're coming from when they talk about the work that they do. I think that team science approach is really important in a lot of what modern anthropology looks like, at least in my setting as a healthcare researcher. If I had a chance to do things otherwise or differently than I did, I really enjoyed the work that I'm doing. I really appreciate what I discovered in the course of my thesis research and that type of thing. But I think I would have been more interested in pursuing languages more and looking at language revival as a course of study or type of work. I think there's a lot to be said around how language encompasses our understanding of the world. When I started my presentation in the other form, I give my Tlingit introductions, how I do most introductions to settings like this, just to bring that language in. It also creates a feeling of alienation, which I think is important for the audience to have that moment of, wow, this is a different culture. This is something else is going on here that I'm not used to. And that's the experience of a lot of natives who engage with anthropology and outside researchers, is that sense of foreignness of what's different. And I don't think that enough of that is reciprocated to understand what the experience of engaging in research is like. So I'll kind of stop there because I think I've been talking for a long time. It's always dangerous to give a Tlingit an open mic without any sort of parameters around where to stop. So I think I've covered enough ground there. I'll pass the mic to somebody else.
This was great, Kyle. Thank you. And that's exactly what this afternoon is intended to be, open discussion. And so Thank you for your initial thoughts. Travis, would you like to talk a little bit about your background for a moment and any questions that strike you from that list?
Sure. Thanks for the opportunity. And I really appreciate Kyle's words there. I agree with much of what he said. For me, I actually have a little bit of an ambiguous relationship with anthropology. I've never really thought of myself as an anthropologist, yet on the other hand, I'm an academic in an academic position, feeling like I do anthropology every day. I really identify as an applied health researcher. I've tried to go out and get involved in work that inspires me and gets me fired up about living. And that helps me be a person in the world. And anthropology was just the path in for me. I never knew what anthropology was as a high school student. I'm from Long Island, New York, public school kid. They experimented on us, and there was a mandatory course that we had to take as seniors. It was called Minority Experience. And it was a week-long program where we had a day that was focused on disability, and we experienced what it was like to utilize a wheelchair for a day, or to not have vision, or to not have hearing. It culminated in a prejudice reduction week that was like a student run and led kind of thing. And I got so fired up about anti-racist type of work, and really got into reading the journals of Frederick Douglass and Chris Columbus, and trying to reread history for its erasures. And I just got so excited about it. Never heard the word anthropology in my life, and had a teacher who said, if you like this stuff, you might like anthropology. So I declared a major in anthropology as a freshman undergrad at State University of New York at Plattsburgh, sight unseen. And never looked back. I took some time off after undergrad I had a teacher say, as long as you've taken one class, you're an anthropologist. That's an identity, you're part of the club, so to speak. But as an undergrad with a bachelor's degree in anthropology, I had no idea what I was going to do. I had an advisor who just said, oh, just start painting the landscape with your resume, which is what I did. My first job out of undergrad was as a preschool teacher in Arizona. I worked as a childcare worker, kind of thought I might have a path as a social worker, came back to Alaska because I missed it, and had this really excellent experience as a practicum student with Hope Community Resources, doing direct care and direct support work for people that experience disabilities. It really helped me fall in love with disability work, but also Alaska as a place. And I saw just the rich, dynamic cultures that exist here, which is something I had never experienced before. And I fell in love and wanted to come back for more. So I think I took a year off after undergrad, came up to Alaska and joined the UAA Applied MA program. I'm also an alumni, where I work with Hope Community Resources, did some stuff around cultural approaches to thinking about and caring for individuals who experience a variety of disabilities. Somehow I kept coming back to the academic stuff. I have a secret love of theory, but only insofar as it helps us solve problems. So for me, it was a door opens and I'm going to step through it and see. What I wish I had more of is a little bit more explicit discussion about application and career possibilities. The translation piece, which is what really drives me right now, I didn't have a lot of in terms of a really traditional anthropology kind of background. And now that I really identify as an applied health researcher, I wish I had more of that. I started a running document as an undergrad of all the buzzwords. Cultural relativism translates as diversity and competence and difficult dialogues. And I heard listening and active listening and things like that. Can we take our anthropological lexicon and have a translation key so that we can help our young students that we're indoctrinating into this awesome and exciting field ways to go out and sell themselves? And it is a matter of selling ourselves, because I shouldn't say nobody. I have never responded to a job ad for anthropologist wanted. I had to go out and bring the anthropology to the world rather than just kind of sit in the corner and wait for the world to come to the anthropology. So that's a big part of how I work. I like working across aisles, kicking down doors, and not everybody has the language that we have, this disciplinary language. And we've got some work to do to translate that. And I guess I'll pass with that. Thanks.
That was great, Travis. Thank you. I love that. The anthropologist wanted. Never seen that ad either in my life. Thank you for sharing a little bit about your background. And yeah, I'd like to hand it over to Rob, if you're willing, Rob, to introduce yourself and talk a little bit about your background. And then if there are any of these 5 questions that strike you, please feel free to share any thoughts that you might have.
Sure thing. Can everybody hear me? Great.
I can hear you.
Oh, as you said, Sheena, I've been an archaeologist, mainly working up here in Alaska for about 13 years. I had an opportunity several years ago to visit kind of long-term with my wife's family down in Jacksonville, Florida, and ended up getting some experience down there doing cultural resource management throughout the American Southeast, mostly in Florida, Georgia, and North Carolina. I do have some experience in academia coming up through my bachelor's and master's degree, but for the most part, the work that I have done has been cultural resource management. A lot of it has been for private companies, some for the National Park Service. But by and large, it's been working within the private sector within archaeology. I am a trained geoarchaeologist under Dr. Josh Ruther. I try to squeeze that into as much of my cultural resource management work that I do as possible, but often that stuff kind of can be left by the wayside in lieu of adding other things that need to be within the reports that we write and the field work that we do. It's also kind of caused me to expand my horizons quite a bit, trying to fit in all of the different things that I need to do with projects. As I've been working in this field. I guess if I was going to answer any of the questions up there, I'd like to talk a little bit more about what I really wish I would have learned in school as opposed to what I did learn. There's a lot in private sector cultural resource management that you need to know that goes into the field of business that we don't really talk about as archaeologists in general. I'm not sure that I would have wanted to learn that in school, but it's been kind of a mad dash figuring that stuff out as a working professional. And there's a lot about the law that we need to learn too. So I think that's about it for me.
Thanks, Rob. Actually, if you were to ask me, I would say almost exactly the same thing, at least with respect to the archaeology aspects of my career. And I'm working with a mentee at Anchorage School District. She's a junior in high school here in Anchorage, and she's very interested in archaeology. And she kind of asked me that question. And I totally agree with you. The legal kind of parameters, the legal framework that we work under in the United States around archaeology, anthropology, cultural resource management, was something I didn't learn in school and I really needed to learn, and ended up being a huge part of my career. And also absolutely the business aspect. And Julie Esdale talked a little bit about a day in her life, and she's had to leave this afternoon, but this morning she talked a little bit about a day in her life and how much administrative work she does in her work. And I think that's important for folks to keep in mind. And we talked a lot about kind of interdisciplinary or cross-disciplinary learning this morning and how important it is to kind of get experience in other aspects that you think are unrelated to your field, and maybe aren't the aspects of your work that you're the most passionate about, but that ultimately will be very useful for you as practical tools. So I don't know if other folks have thoughts about that while we're chatting. What are the things in your job that you do because you have to, maybe perhaps reluctantly so, but it's a necessity and you needed to learn about? I think Julie said preparing budgets and preparing budgets and preparing more budgets for funding opportunities or whatever. It is an aspect of her work and many of our jobs that we have to learn, regardless of whether it's like the core area of our focus or passion.
Yeah, I agree with what Julie said. I think preparing budgets, and I think Kyle put in the chat that writing grants is a big aspect of the work that we do. I get to work with Kyle, so hi Kyle, and on several projects. And you know, we are lucky to work for a department, research department in a tribal healthcare system that has some base funding from our organization. The tribal health system we work for, Southcentral Foundation, values and prioritizes research for the community from within the community, and so much that they have dedicated some funding to supporting the operations and endeavors of the research department. That said, we still have to apply for a lot of grants, and most of our grant funding comes from the National Institutes of Health. And so I spend, as a principal investigator, probably, I don't know, it's hard to quantify, but I spend a significant amount of my time developing and writing grants and going after grants. Ruby and I talk about this periodically, you know, what grants can we write together to collaborate, because it's always better when we have grants that are collaborative, and both for the fundability of them, or what we call grantsmanship, as well as just for the strength of having interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary research teams that have a lot of different experiences and expertise, especially within Alaska, since we're a unique setting. And we want to work with people who understand the context, both in the villages and in the urban settings where we work. So I think that I actually have discovered through my job that I really like grant writing. So it's really stressful and it's really hard. So I'm always extremely happy when it's done. It's sort of like finals, like you get through it and you're like, yay. But at the same time, it's a huge sense of accomplishment. And unlike finals, sometimes there's a big payoff when it works and you get big, you know, chunks of money to go do really good, important work. So I think that's been a nice surprise for me. But I guess I forgot to mention some of the fun parts of my job too. I mean, I sort of sound like a cheerleader, and honestly, I am really stressed out sometimes, and I get really, you know, I have, like everybody else, I have my ups and downs, but it is the passion that keeps bringing me, you know, that helps me get through those periods. I get to go to NIH Tribal Advisory Committee meetings with my boss, Denise Dillard, who is our research director, and she's a member of the Tribal Advisory Committee, which is a group of Alaska Native and American Indian people from across the US that advise the National Institutes of Health Tribal Health Research Office on how to work with tribes and how to develop grants to support tribes. And so I go as her technical advisor, and that's been really interesting. I've learned a ton. So, I mean, that's something I never thought I would do as an anthropology student. I didn't even know it existed. And so, yeah, I think there are mundane things, but sometimes even those mundane things can be fun. And you learn strategies even when they're not fun. You learn strategies to, you know, you still have to do the dishes. Eating the food is the fun part, but there's always dishes to do and there's always groceries to shop for. So we get it done.
That's a great metaphor. And I know, you know, with respect to grant writing and other administrative tasks, I certainly know that Monica and Erin share in, you know, having to kind of hone those skills. So there's some questions. There's a question in the chat. So on grant writing, how does one develop grant writing skills in a really practical terms? Like, who gives you feedback on your drafts? Did you rely on books to learn how? Do you or did you serve as reviewers to learn? Good questions.
Maybe I could try this one, get us started.
Please, that'd be great.
I feel like I didn't get much of it as an undergrad. So good to ask the question and start now. I mean, the sort of easy way would be to reach out to an advisor and express an interest. That's one way. A lot of times at UAA, they have like these one-offs, like day-long workshops where you could just come with an idea and workshop it with peers, or even attend as an observer and listen and take notes. There's several books, so there is some book knowledge to be developed, but I think the best way is just working with peers. I've done a lot of the learning on my own on the fly. In retrospect, I wish I had a little bit more of a foundation. The Society for Applied Anthropology, which is a community that I really like. And that was the first, I'd say, professional conference that I cut my teeth on. Every year they have something called the Methods Mall. And within the Methods Mall, they have all kinds of little one-offs that if you were an SFAA member attending the conference, you could attend a half-day or full-day workshop on grant writing. As you get deeper into your grad program and start having research questions in your grad programs, oftentimes there'll be peer support groups, students that just want to get together and workshop on ideas. When I was a grad student at Kentucky, we kept a proposal graveyard, we called it, which was both funded and unfunded proposals, where we could get together and identify things that worked in a strong proposal, regardless of content area, and also look at some consistent weaknesses that we're able to find. So just being able to look through old proposals was really helpful. I think if you asked just about anybody that you know, gee whiz, I'm thinking about writing a proposal on a research idea, do you have an example? I think just about everybody would share an example, and that's also a good way to do it more informally, just to reach out and ask for examples. And yeah, good question.
I chime in also. So I write grants, I review grants, both large and small, both for national and for local, for reviews, as well as writing grants. And I cannot stress enough writing skills. I am amazed by the lack of writing skills that people have because they don't get feedback, right? Or they don't read the feedback. And I know that professors have a lot of students, and so you should really not rely on only your professors, but take advantage of TAs, take advantage of your fellow graduate or undergraduate students, and really develop writing skills, clear writing, grammatically correct writing, telling a story is really important in the grant. So there's a lot of books out there. There's a lot of small webinars that you take advantage of and you listen. And whoever put in the chat about starting small, that's how I did. Our professional organizations, whichever you belong to, all offer scholarships. Even scholarship writing is a grant writing. So you need to just think about it in that way and develop those skills. And then if there's somebody that you value or you read something that they've written that you think that they write really well, Sheena writes really well. Like maybe ask Sheena, hey, I know Sheena, let me see if she'd be willing to review a draft. And then give them time, nothing last minute, right? You need to do things in advance. And I'm a terrible procrastinator, and I tend to write my grants really last minute, but I still give myself a few days to walk away and then come back and read it again as if it's fresh. I'm right now reviewing grants, and there are words missing. And so I really think about that, is that when you're cutting and pasting and you're tired, you accidentally miss those kinds of things. And I just think it's so sad because I can't look past that, and I don't think any of the other reviewers look past that. A poorly written grant or not taking the time to do everything just shows that you don't care as much. So why would I want to give you money? So I think those things, and I think most of the people on this call with the professions they do, they all write grants. So, these are all, again, that idea of relationship building is, having people who look at your writing and be honest and don't take offense. It's not personal, it's work. It's just words and we're just improving, and you're just trying to be more clear and develop your own style, right? You don't need to copy somebody else's style.
I think Elizabeth has her hand up, and I just want to ask if at some point, and if you already did this, Ruby, I apologize, or whoever's facilitating, if could the students like put their hands up? I just am not, I don't have a sense, since I don't work on campus, of like how many people here are students and how many of us are professional anthropologists or other folks on the call. So I would just love to like be able to kind of see the students and say hi in my mind.
Elizabeth, go ahead with your question while folks are, we have a lot of, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, let me see if I can actually figure out how to lower my, there we go. Yeah, so I'm a first year master's student in Utah, of all places. I didn't get my undergrad in anthropology. I did like a interdisciplinary great books, classics, liberal arts type thing for my BA, and only realized I wanted to go into anthropology later. This is my first little triple A's. I've been loving soaking in all the stuff about community-based work and methodologies. You know, that kind of thing is a lot of what was appealing to me about anthropology in the first place. So I guess I have two questions about that. The first one is, like, you know, I haven't actually even been to Alaska yet. I'm going to be going for my field school there this summer with Bree Daring. But so how do you get started on that? And the other part is like, as you're just starting to look for work in, like, you know, I'll probably be working in CRM. I don't know exactly what my overall trajectory will look like, but is there a good way to sort of feel out a prospective employer's ethics beforehand is basically what I want to know.
That is an excellent question. And it's a great segue because I have yet to introduce our friend and colleague, Lindsay Simmons, who's now on. And so I'm going to introduce Lindsay, and then maybe Lindsay, not to put you on a spot, but I would love it if you could try to address that question, because I think it's really relevant to you and your work, and maybe Rob can talk too. But Lindsay Simmons, hey, Lindsay, has over 15 years of professional experience in cultural resource management. She's completed projects throughout the contiguous United States of America, Alaska, and Belize. Lindsay completed her undergraduate studies in anthropology and chemistry, I didn't realize that, at Eckerd College in St. Petersburg, Florida, and her graduate studies in anthropology at the University of Cincinnati in Ohio. Lindsay has managed and participated in projects seeking compliance with state and federal regulations, including the Alaska Historic Preservation Act, the National Historic Preservation Act, Section 106 and Section 110, NEPA, and FERC requirements. In addition to her archaeological experience, she also has experience with aspects of business management. We were just talking about the importance of having business skills, including strategic planning, business development, budget monitoring, and contract compliance, quality control, and personnel utilization. Lindsay is currently the general manager of Northern Land Use Research Alaska, LLC. And I will say, and Lindsay, you can elaborate, that we're encouraging those of you who are here as panelists to share information about your upcoming opportunities as well. So maybe you can talk about that and maybe address Elizabeth's question.
Perfect. Yeah, I will address Elizabeth's question first. So I think it's a great question. You know, I think that just like when employers are looking for potential employees, we tend to reach out, make phone calls, interviews. I think the employee has just as much of a right to kind of turn that conversation around. So I would encourage you to reach out, make phone calls, strike up those conversations, build those relationships. The first call is always the scariest, right? But Alaska is a really small world, especially when it comes to the scientific fields. And I would say the sooner you get comfortable with just reaching out and getting to know people, the easier it gets. And that's the only way you really get to know someone, right? And I'm sure you'll cross paths with people where, you know, your ideals just don't align, and that's okay. But the only way you're really going to figure that out is to dig in, meet that person, and start those conversations. So I know for me, when I talk to applicants, more often than not, it's initiated with a random resume that's submitted through our website. And I like to follow up via phone and start building that relationship so that I can really get to know that person. But on the flip side, it gives that applicant an opportunity to ask questions. So we have an open door policy here at Northern Land Use. And I think that's pretty consistent across my colleagues, that if there's ever a question, you should never be afraid to ask. And yeah, sooner you can start building those relationships, the better, right? Did that help at all?
Yeah, no, that is helpful. I mean, I'll have to figure out how exactly to put those questions, like, so how moral are you when it comes to, anyway, details.
Well, and I think, too, sometimes those things just like organically flesh themselves out as you get work experience. So like to that end, there's some value in early in your career experiencing, in my opinion, experiencing various companies, different arms of anthropology, archaeology, and really figuring out not just what maybe what interest or specialty is your preference, but also what sort of company or people you want to work with.
It's great. There's lots of chatter going on in the chat. So scroll and looks like we've got some common career trajectories and shared university experiences. So that's good. It is a small world in Alaska and beyond, for sure. Lindsay, since I have you, this morning, some of the panelists addressed some of those 5 questions that we threw out there, which are, what is a day in the life? What does a day in the life look like for you? What are the day-to-day tasks and skills that are really important? Maybe what do you wish you learned about your profession in school, and what have you learned on the job? Or what would you do differently? Do you want to touch on 1 or 2 of those things? Does anything strike you?
Sure. So I did not get into anthropology until my last semester of my junior year. So I came late to the game in undergrad. I didn't have a field school until between my undergrad and graduate studies. I actually got denied from a graduate school program because I didn't have demonstrated CRM experience. So I didn't take kind of what's the standard path into graduate school and into my career, but I knew what I wanted to do, and so I kept just pushing at it, right? And if one avenue didn't work, it was kind of a backpedal, reassess, and go into another angle. So I think the biggest lessons I've learned is that if you know what you want to do in your heart, and you maybe just don't know how to get there, just stick at it, right? Like reach out to the people who have had successes and pick their brains, and don't be afraid to misstep, because there are those learning opportunities. Yeah, I think that for me, I don't get to do much archaeology with my current position. I do more business management, client management. A lot of it is more teaching people who are not versed in regulations that we deal with, how to navigate them and how to comply with them. So it's almost more of a instructional position than it is a research position. And I think to that end, that's a product of me finding a way to capitalize my personality and my skill set. So I really was drawn to anthropology and archaeology as in my early 20s. It was just something I've always been interested in. But my personality is very mathematical. I'm very, very into numbers, organization, spreadsheets, and digging into the details, but I'm also an extrovert, if you can't tell by how much I talk. So this position and these responsibilities really aligned with just what I viewed as my strong suit. So I would encourage you to really self-reflect and see what your strong suits are, and try to find a career that that not only aligns with your passions, but also with your natural strengths.
That is such great advice. And it's interesting to hear you say that, Lindsay, because I've kind of had a similar unfolding in my career. You know, I was interested in fine arts and anthropology and archaeology early in my career, but what my career ended up really emphasizing for a long period was regulations and business management and grant writing and administrative stuff. And I liked it. It's okay to like that stuff too. You know, it might be like Jennifer was saying earlier, you know, there's parts of your career and your day-to-day life that are exhausting and stressful and frustrating, and that spans across whatever you might be doing. But it's also okay to find that, you know, you like some of the technical aspects of your work too, maybe the report writing like Julie talked about, or developing budgets. Like, it's okay if you like developing budgets. If you're good at it, then tap into those natural strengths. And I think that's a really important thing to keep in mind, and be willing to like try all those different things and realize that there's some of work that you're really going to like doing, and there's some of work that you're really not going to like doing, and that's just part of work too.
I know another piece of advice that was given to me was certainly our work is important, but it's not life or death. And so when you're really in the middle of something and you just think like, oh my God, everything's crumbling, or we're never going to get out from under this. My boss at the time said, you know, this isn't life or death. The decisions we make are not, you know, we're not on, you know, the operating table trying to do a quadruple bypass or something like that. I mean, you can make mistakes, you learn from those mistakes, and you just pick yourself up and keep on going.
Did I answer enough of those bullet points?
Yeah, that's great. Just reviewing the chat here. Ruby says also
offer one
recognize.
other.
Oh yeah.
Oh,
Go ahead.
sorry. I was just going to say, and forgive me because I got distracted for a minute by a little baby fire that I had to help put out. If somebody hasn't already said this, an interesting way of asking about ethics and approaches, I like that suggestion, Ruby, is to ask what, when you're interviewing for a position, ask your interviewers, always have questions for your interviewers. They will, if they're good interviewers, they'll ask you what your questions are. And it's always good to have some in your pocket ready for them, and ask them, what do you most enjoy about doing this work? What do you most enjoy about working for this organization? And also, what are your biggest challenges in doing this type of work? And I think you can learn a lot. Those are really good open-ended questions that can give you a lot of indirect information about what the culture of an organization or a group is like that you might be considering working with.
I think it's important to add too that it's good to ask the people who have either worked for or worked with this group in the past. Most archaeologists I know are not afraid to, you know, talk about the people that they've worked with, and they can give you a pretty good insight on how that company or organization might treat both the people it treats as clientele and its own employees.
Kyle, did you want to add something?
I wanted to add before I forgot, stepping way back to the grant writing question, team writing is something that, in my experience, all grants have been developed as part of a team. And that's not something that they really teach in undergrad. When you write papers and things like that, you're the sole author. And even developing peer-reviewed manuscripts, they're almost always something that you write together with other people. And that's a tricky thing to balance sometimes. You know, even just this idea of voice, trying to get, you know, so somebody wrote the method section, somebody else wrote the results, and you collaborated on discussion. And so you've got, you know, 3 or 4 different ways of talking about the topic, trying to make sure that you've got uniform terminology used throughout. Those are not things that are typically encouraged as objects of study within academic institutions, but I think it's really important. And that, again, comes out when you're dealing with grant writing is that, somebody wrote the summary, somebody else wrote the, this or that part, and then trying to get it all comprehensive. And I think somebody mentioned telling a story, that's a very important skill to learn. And something else that I think could be really encouraged with regard to grant writing is the strict word counts, and trying to figure out how to summarize things most adroitly so that you're only talking about the most pertinent information in the most condensed format possible. That can be really difficult. So I'll also share, Lindsay, that I really love numbers. And I remember hearing that it was very odd for anthropologists to have that quantitative spin. So you're not alone.
Sorry, I had to step away for a sec.
Elizabeth did ask in the chat.
Oh yeah.
I guess that could lead into, are there other companies that I should be aware of to avoid, if that isn't too sensitive of a question? And feel free to speak as broadly or specifically as possible, but remember this is recorded.
I'll go ahead and speak up. And I think that this is in line with what I was saying before. I think it's subjective, and I think it depends on what you're really looking for and what you want out of an employer. And it's always nice to have some background information, but it's largely just opinions. And I would encourage you to, I don't think you could go wrong, right? I think you're going to get something out of any experience that you have. And I think the best way to make a decision on whether an employer or a job is the right fit for you is to do your own personal kind of research through those conversations with potential employers or with people who've worked for the companies, agencies, et cetera, that you may be interested in.
I'd like to add to that. I don't want to call out any orgs or anything, so I'll avoid the trap of listing, but I'll speak my own personal truth. I'm not an archaeologist, so I guess maybe I can safely say this. I did have a previous employment stint with the Army Corps of Engineers and worked a little bit on some of the in Western Alaska, some of the village coastal erosion work. Had an opportunity to visit a lot of communities in the YK Delta and participate in community conversations, hear concerns. And I had a concern that the federally mandated government to government relationship wasn't really being honored. And I don't want to name names, but I followed up, this idea of open door. I did step into that and expressed, hey, this doesn't feel right. And was told by a person who shall remain nameless that, we're only talking about quasi-sovereignty anyway. And that was kind of the beginning of the end of my working for that place, to the point of, you have to find out what your threshold is. And I'm a cultural anthro, so I'll run back to my corner now. I don't mean that in a disparaging way. That was my experience, and it was a limited one, and it was only mine.
Well, I think, Travis, you bring up a very interesting point, and taking kind of my museum hat off for a second and putting on my tribal hat. I think that if you're doing work in Alaska, you really should understand what is tribal sovereignty and what are government to government relationships. And I would say, having worked with a lot of different agencies, and again, I won't specifically name names for the bad ones, but I can tell you that my experience, certainly in Anchorage, working with the military and J Barons in particular, has been a very fruitful partnership. And I think it's just understanding what are these federal regulations, Section 106, and really understanding what is the NAGPRA, different, getting a background and familiarity with that is, I think, critically important. And then also understanding what are the challenges that we face in our state, particularly from state government, about what does it mean to have tribal sovereignty and recognition, and working with communities and tribal councils, and really meaningful collaborations. I would also say sometimes there's been, just because the institution that the individual works for is not always beneficial, that doesn't mean your relationship as you being the representative can't do meaningful work. It may not go as far as you would like to see it go, but at least you can build those personal relationships. And I think it makes a big difference from the tribal perspective if they know that there's at least somebody that's sympathetic to their concerns. Maybe they don't get completely addressed, but that's kind of working from within to try, and it may take a long time to help maybe change the narrative or at least soften some of the points about whatever the issue is. So
I'm going to jump on to what Erin said a little bit, because I think that is so important what you just said, Erin. And I think that one way to think about it is that there are, and forgive me if this seems a little hokey, but this helps me to think about things in this way. There are categorical differences and there are continuous differences. So, or qualitative and quantitative differences is another way to think about it. I mean, there are qualitative differences in ethics between just, if it's just a bad scene, there's not work, it's just a bad scene and it just needs to be completely changed. And one where there actually is some good stuff, but or the potential for good stuff, but there's a lot of work to do. And there's a lot of progress and evolution that needs to happen. I'm using evolution badly, but to make that, to make things the way they should be, whoever's defining what that is. And I think that understanding the difference between those and being able to look at things through that lens sometimes is helpful for me, both in just deciding if it's where I want to put my energy, but also in just understanding and living with sometimes the frustration that I think Erin was speaking to. And you can correct me if I'm wrong, Erin, but the frustration that I think we all feel when things just aren't the way we wish that they were, or the way we think they should be, even though like we've all heard, like, how can it be 2022? And I think Elizabeth put in the chat, like that should, tribal sovereignty and trust relationships should be taught in school. Well, yes, they should. And you're not going to get any arguments, I don't think, from anyone here. And if you do, then that's a categorical difference. Like that's a completely different perspective than what you're likely to get. But that also, but the fact is that things are not what they should be in many places in the world. And that's why we do applied work. And so we have to find ways to cope with the frustration while also doing what we can and learning how to be skilled and strategic and useful and helpful. And it's all fraught. It's all fraught with all kinds of judgment and human subjectivity and ethical quandaries. And that's why we need each other too, so that when we need the relationships with people who we share values and perspectives with, and who can also challenge us, to be honest, and who can challenge our thinking and make sure that we are thinking about the things the way that, that we should be thinking about, and doing our own reflexive work.
Would you like to get?
So can I hop in there a little bit? Or no? Okay. So I actually gave a presentation this morning on tribal consultation in Section 106 today. I am Indigenous, Kanaitze, Golcana Village here, Dene. I've ran into a lot of issues with tribal consultation. And I'm really sad to say we're 56 years into, the tribal or the Historic Preservation Act being passed, and we're still having issues with this. And I thought it was just here in Alaska, but I attended NAFPO, which is the National Association of Tribal Historic Preservation Officers, last week. And it was really disheartening to find out that tribal consultation is an issue across the country. It's not just Alaska. So there's a lot. Sorry, dogs. I apologize. I have let them out of their crates since this morning's meetings, and now they're going crazy. But yeah, there is a lot of stuff that needs to be worked on here in Alaska. And I came through the UAA system. My mentors were amazingly ethical. They've always pressed the importance of tribal sovereignty. So for me to have encountered individuals who came through the same system I have and have literally told colleagues, the tribe doesn't matter. Don't listen to them. You don't have to consult with them. Or my personal favorite happened literally just this year, this last season. The tribe should be seen and not heard. And that was referenced to me literally being in the field and having major concerns about, I think it was about the 15th breach of the PA in the field. So there's a lot of stuff wrong in contract archaeology in Alaska. And there's not a lot of us out there who are native, who are in this field trying to fix these issues. And I'm very close to being pushed out of here. Like, I'm ready to jump out to a PhD to get out of this field. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done in Alaska for sure. And that's all I really wanted to say.
I raised my hand, but
Lindsay,
I don't think
please,
I'm cutting anybody else. Yeah.
No, you're not.
Norma,
You're good.
I think those are all really great points. You know, I think one of the things that we could do better at, and I say we as contract archaeologists, is educate our employees, specifically our seasonal employees, right? Because the nature of seasonal workers who really constitute the majority of the workers that are doing field work in the summertime, they may not have the educational background or knowledge to understand what the regulations are, what the requirements of government to government consultation are, but more importantly, what their role is in it, right? And the reality is that contractors are not governments. Lead agencies in terms of the regulations are the governments that should be conducting that consultation. The role of the contractors and by, you know, the derivative of that, the field archaeologists and the employees are to facilitate and be proponents of the resource and compliance with the regulations. So I'm not disagreeing with you, Norma. I just wanted to further clarify for anybody that is on the phone and maybe doesn't have the context that it's not the individual contract archaeologist's role to hold up that government to government consultation, although it is in many cases a proactive stance to encourage it, right? I in no way, shape, or form could ever imagine, although I'm sure you experienced it, Norma, based on what you said, but I could never imagine someone saying seen and not heard. That's not something that, at least I can speak for our company, we would ever want somebody working for us to think, agree with, or even more importantly, communicate. So I just wanted to make sure we were kind of like differentiating between what is a government agency role in this and what is a contractor role in this.
I'll just jump in here because I have some experience in this area of work as well. And I do want to say that this speaks to, you know, when we talk back to our 5 questions or whatever, what do you wish you would have learned in school? Or, you know, what have you had to learn on the job? And this speaks very closely to my personal experience in archaeology, cultural resource management, that understanding kind of roles and responsibilities. I mean, and Elizabeth, you brought up a really great question about ethics, which I think is like this top umbrella thing that we all are beholden to and should be really have a good understanding of the standards, professional standards and ethics in our field. Like that's the utmost important thing. But within that, we also have this kind of legal and regulatory environment that I didn't learn a lot about when I was in school. And it happened to end up being a huge part of my career and what I needed to learn and what I needed to know, so that I understood, like, what is the federal agency's responsibility? What are the tribal responsibilities and roles in this? What are the contractor responsibilities and roles in this work? What is my responsibility, you know, depending on where I'm situated and who I'm working for? And not to say that you always have to stay in your lane either. Like, I don't want to suggest that either, because if you see something that's wrong or unethical, like Norma was sharing, I think it's absolutely anybody's right at any point to step out and say that is unethical. It doesn't matter what the legal, you know, role or responsibility is that you have. But I think it is really helpful when you're, you know, starting out in a career in anthropology and archaeology, because we work with people and real communities and living resources, that you know, like what the legal and regulatory world looks like too, so that you can understand, like, where can I step in, and am I able to step in this case? If it's not like an ethical, I think you should always step in if it's an ethical issue. If it's kind of like defining roles and responsibilities as a project unfolds or whatever, it's really good to know that. So I'll just say that and stop there.
You know, I would also say if you run up against something like that, talking with other people that have worked in the same area, that have built up relationships, and you know, asking for advice, I think is important. And sometimes it requires the tribes themselves, letting the tribes know that they have a right to exercise their voice, and that if it gets nasty, in worst case scenario, go to the press. I mean, you know, right before I was involved with my tribe, we had to, luckily we had an anthropologist archaeologist that really pushed for us on a bad Section 106 review of a clearly documented Dena'ina site right near Anchorage. And we got them to completely change course after several. The other thing was getting several tribes in the area involved. It wasn't just our tribe, it was multiple tribes signing letters saying that this is, we have clear documentation of this. You hired this outside CRM firm. They did a cursory review. They didn't talk to any of the documented elders. You know, they didn't talk to the elders, they didn't talk to the tribe, they didn't talk to the anthropologists that had, you know, spent decades working with people to push for it, you know. And sometimes you just have to go down that road. And I don't know, Norma, your specifics, but it's, sometimes it does get nasty, you know, and it is, you know, that you sometimes get minimized too. I mean,
Yeah, I am very thankful for the mentors and the support system I've built over the last 6 months or so. I don't think I would have survived otherwise. But it's really frustrating to see how things are being done when you have the boots on the field. There's so many of our signatories that had no idea what was going on with the project in general and the things that I was seeing on the ground. And when I would complain to the agencies and said, hey, I would take off my tribal hat and put on my federal representative hat under Section 106 and try to inform everybody what was going on, and just repeatedly being slapped down. I was told I was difficult, I'm excitable, and that I didn't know what I was doing because I'm so new to the field. And my traditional knowledge was just completely disregarded. So it's extremely frustrating dealing with that up here.
As a person that came from a PhD program outside of Alaska, I will say that the people who were supposed to be advising me were very good for very narrow skill set building, but I would even amend my earlier comments to say, like, don't just have mentors in Alaska that but have mentors, and I mean, just develop close relationships and friendships with people in the communities that you're working with who don't necessarily automatically agree with you on everything that you're doing. And to try to have those deep conversations with people, because and a lot of times I think as people who are coming in from the outside, it is our responsibility to start those conversations and to open those doors rather than just relying on people to say something if they think something's wrong. Because I think that that's often a very unfair burden to ask communities to fulfill. And I mean, that's not to say that everyone in a community is going to agree on any particular aspect of something, but every community is so different, and it's just super important to maintain those relationships, because you can go down paths pretty far without realizing how bad of an impact something is making. So or good, but yeah, I would just really encourage that.
I'm fond of saying that negative intentions are not a prerequisite for doing harm. A lot of well-intentioned people have done a lot of harm, and so I concur that relationships are not always well-intentioned people. there's the categorical differences again, but I want to just reinforce what everyone else has said about relationships. And I think I don't think we use the word ally here a lot, but I know in LGBTQ communities, that's a word that's used a lot. And I think being a good ally and learning how to be supportive and in a good way and is also important for those of us who are non-native researchers working in Alaska and who want to support tribal communities. And a big part of that is listening to our Alaska Native and American Indian friends and colleagues closely and asking questions and following their lead when that's the appropriate thing to do, which I find is often. So. So I'll just say one more thing. It's one of the reasons why I like working for a tribal organization. I'll just say it again. It's not something, I don't think it's a tribal health organization, I should say. I'm working, my boss is Alaska Native, my CEO is Alaska Native, 75% of my colleagues in the research department are Alaska Native. So it gives me an opportunity to do learning that I just don't think I could do in a different type of setting. And that allows me to be a better researcher, I hope.
Yeah, I was going to share as well that I have always found it appreciated when I shared Native history, Native perspectives, Indigenous knowledge, alternative ways of looking at the healthcare issues that we're dealing with from an Alaska Native perspective. So I do also appreciate the fact that that is something that is probably somewhat unique to working within a tribal healthcare organization, that the Indigenous framework is something that is appreciated and encouraged to be brought into the work.
And I hope I don't upset anybody, but I did want to bring up that in some ways my anthropological training has informed my interactions with Native healthcare. And on several occasions, I have called them out on what they're doing because I know the way they frame questions are ways to generate statistics that are then used to justify why certain programs need to happen. And so there have been multiple times where I've went in and, I go in because I, have seasonal allergies, and I constantly get asked, do I drink? Do I smoke? Blah, blah, blah. And I've said, that's none of your business. They said, well, we need to know for your overall health profile. And I've said, you want to check a box. You didn't ask me what is my educational background. You didn't ask anything else related to that. I understand a lot of what this is about, but at the same time, I also understand that I'm not obliged to answer your questions. And when I go to a private healthcare facility, I'm not asked always the same questions. Again, that's a broad brush stroke, but I use that as an example of where it has taught me, how how to think critically, again, at the same time. And unfortunately, I think oftentimes, certainly for Native people, we are conditioned not to ask questions. And that's unfortunately not the right answer, to get behind what is the reasoning for certain things and not just accept it as a universal truth.
No, and I think,
Absolutely. I'm so glad you, oh, sorry, go ahead, Kyle.
no, and I think that's a very great point. In my experience, being a healthcare researcher within the tribal health system is very different from my being a patient within the tribal health system. And I've seen a lot of the rhetoric around advocating for, Indigenous peoples or self-directing your health that has not always been the experience of being a patient within the healthcare system, where I feel sometimes like I'm being encouraged down specific types of treatment or getting asked these questions time and again that I, as a researcher, wouldn't want to be included, I very much hear your point. And
yeah, it's informed consent. I mean, we do the same thing when we go in and ask, into a community. And I don't know that we've gotten there. But again, I don't bring it up to point fingers at anybody. It's an observation that I've made. And I would not have made that observation had I not had a background in anthropology and what I was taught in school.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, and there is this kind of stovepipe or firewall effect between the operations of the healthcare system and the support departments that help move the organization as a whole forward. So we don't have a huge impact on clinical care, even though we are applied and a lot of our work does ultimately make its way over there. We're not directly engaging with the provision of care. So.
Not usually, but not to contradict you, Kyle, but now I'm going to contradict you. Now, just a tiny bit, because I think increasingly we're starting to do more. This doesn't need to all move towards talking about only health research, because I know there's a lot of different types of researchers here, but I think that increasingly we are beginning to focus more on building our skill set and doing what's called dissemination and implementation science research, which is about studying how healthcare interventions are implemented and looking at what affects the effectiveness of them. And I would say that whatever was being asked of you in that moment, that was not effective implementation of whatever that programming was that was happening. And so what we're looking at is so we are increasingly, I think, trying to become more involved in partnering with the clinics. So we'll be doing that with a palliative care intervention soon. And it's a lot of the cultural adaptation work that we do with interventions the intent is that it would eventually affect how they're implemented. So again, it's like there's this gap between the underlying principles and values of the healthcare system and what's actually happening in practice, and trying to close that gap, because I think that the values and principles are there and they're strong, but figuring out how to then create the system that meets them is an ongoing challenge.
Well, I think it's about constantly reevaluating, and I certainly see that. And I'm old enough to remember what, healthcare looked like before we took it over. And I'm not advocating that we go back to that system at all, but I am just cautioning to say that sometimes just because we're running it doesn't make us always right.
Mm-hmm. And I think to your general point, the idea that anthropology empowered you to speak up and to self-direct your care also reflects on my experience with a very different set of circumstances, which is when my mom passed and we had to deal with the cremation organization, which I don't even remember the name of, so I can't call them out, but they gave us a runaround, and my relatives did not feel empowered to challenge them. Like you were saying, they weren't empowered to question authority or to say otherwise. But I, as a researcher, was like, wait, they're saying what now? I can Google that. I can Google it and see what's going on. I'm going to call the medical examiner and see what's going on with my mom's body. No, this is not what you're telling me is going on. You're telling me that it's something else around how long it'll take to cremate her remains. I'm going to look on your website. I'm going to look at the National Association of Funeral Home Directors. This is not the information, I'm triangulating data to try and figure out what they're telling me. And I challenged them and I called them back and was like, you need to, we've got relatives coming down from Anchorage, from all over the state. We told them that we'd have her remains ready based on the timeline you initially gave us. And again, it was exactly because I had that research background, that I had an anthropology background, that I was able to call them out and say, this is not right. This is not what you said you would do. You need to do what you promised.
I've seen a lot of pushback at ANMC. I've been in charge of my father's healthcare for like the last 16 years now, and he has been sober 13 years now. And anytime he's had a stroke or a diabetic crisis, etc., and we take him in, I've seen where once we declare that he was an alcoholic and he's been sober, you know, however many years at that point, we do see the doctors kind of check out. They're just like, oh, well, this is just related to his past alcohol abuse. Just treat him and get him out of here. I've questioned the doctors. I've done my own Googling. I keep a really extensive notebook of all of his medical issues, all of his medications. I am on top of it. So when they say something that doesn't make sense, I look right on the internet, I start figuring it out, and I do push back. They don't like that at all. I ran into the same thing raising my children. It's really frustrating to see where even in healthcare, we're not taken seriously, that we're considered in a way not educated, or we don't know how to look up this stuff ourselves. Yeah, that's been my experience, just taking care of my father and now my kids. And I find it easier sometimes to go to private healthcare than go to the hospital, where literally all of our medical records have been since birth.
Well, and what I told them too was that I choose this because I support the system. I don't have to come to you guys. You know, I have private insurance and I'm happy to use it, but I support this, and I'm not doing it. I expect a certain level of care, and I'm not doing it because I have to come here. It's because I choose to come here. And so please don't forget that. And, you know, you're right. I think to a larger issue, Norma, what you talk about, I think everybody, you have to be advocates for your own health care, and you have to, you know, and whatever system it is, don't always accept it. But I just simply point out some of the targeted direction that I've gotten, or directed questions, I should say.
This is an amazing discussion, but I did want, and people are more than welcome to stay, but I did want to note that it is technically the end of our session. So if people had other sessions that they wanted to attend this afternoon, please feel free to do so. Otherwise, I'm not sure, Sheena, if we can keep it open, or if somebody else.
Actually, you know what? I think Josh might be in the room. And if he is, maybe he can weigh in on that. Josh, I'm not sure if this room is needed for another session.
We do have one more session planned in here for today that is not scheduled to start for another 20 minutes. So we certainly do have that in
have a little bit of time. Okay.
And the next session is just the film screening that I'm doing the introduction for. So there's no lead up that we really need if you're interested in continuing this for another few minutes.
Yeah, we've had such a great discussion, and we've spanned so many different topics across so many different sectors of all of our work in anthropology. And I just, you know, if folks need to drop off, that's totally fine. If folks want to stick around and chat a little bit more, that's great too. I think that Ruby and Maureen and I really just want to thank you all so much for being so open and just honest and willing to share. And I hope that it was of benefit to the folks who joined to listen in on the discussion. And I also know that folks will really enjoy having these recordings afterwards. We've just had a great discussion. So thank you so much for spending time with us today and sharing your experiences and your insights.
Also, if students are, or even, you know, I think we've developed some interesting relationships even between panelists today, or furthered them. If you guys need any contact information for each other, or if students would like to contact any of the panelists, I think many, if not all, have allowed us to share their contact information with you. So please let us know, and we can put our contact information in the chat as well for you guys to let us know.
Thanks to the hosts for facilitating. You guys did an awesome job, and for the invitation. This has been really fun, and I don't get to hang out with other anthropologists very often, except for Kyle. We're like our own little club, so it's nice to see you all.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Sheena, Ruby, Maureen. It was very nice to meet you all.
Yes, thank you.
I unfortunately have to run, but it was a really great panel.
That's good. That's great. Enjoy the rest of the conference. Thanks, everyone.
Christina.